What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to our second episode of the Brown Gyal Diary podcast. If you don't know me, my name's Ashley. I'm founder of the Brown Gyal Diary.
I'm Tiara. I'm our editor-in-chief and a bunch of other things too.
Literally just the co-person for Brown Gyal Diary with me. And we are super excited to have you guys back. We had our first episode, and this time we have like a lot of cool things to talk to you about. We just like celebrated Carnival in Toronto. Tiara, you had some amazing things going on. So we're just like excited to just have everybody kind of like dive into these things with us. So before we get into things though,
yes,
I do have a question for our audience at home.
Yeah, so we're interested. So if you have tuned in so far, I know it's only been one episode, but you probably have noticed we don't actually have an official name for the podcast, but this is where we want your help. We want you guys to drop some names in the comments and let us know what you think.
What? Stop, just get serious. How about let's get serious? Okay, go.
Okay, I'm okay.
Okay, start over.
I don't know, it's just like off the corner of my eye.
Okay, go.
Okay, give me a second. Something.
It was too like we just. Okay, go. Seriously, stop laughing. Come on, let's just get this shit done.
I'm good. Okay, so first things first, we like to start off with our mental health check, right? So, Ashley, how are you feeling today on a scale of 1 to 10? And how's your week been? Talk about it. What's something good that's been happening this week?
To be honest with you, I am actually feeling really good. Like I this week I started getting back into the gym. I've been saying I wanted to do hot yoga for a long time, so I got into that. I did it like a couple years ago for a bit and I stopped, but now I'm like back into it. I'm feeling really good and really positive about it. Like I'm not feeling like it's a strain on anything I have to do. Like it feels very effortless. So I like things that feel effortless. So I've just been like on a really, really good schedule, and scheduling is like super important to me. So you obviously know that.
Yeah. I know.
So I feel good. Like I feel really good. I feel like I had a really successful week. I can like look back on this week and feel like I accomplished a lot of things. So I'm at a 10. That sounds like 10 to me.
That sounds like 10 to me too.
What about you though? How are you feeling?
I don't know. I think I'll say like I'm at maybe a 7 or 8. You know what I mean? I think same thing. Like the week, I feel like I got a lot of stuff done this week, and I just kind of like picked up on like little errands and stuff that I've been meaning to get done. So that was just one of those things, like, you know, when you get something done off your plate and it's just been a while, so then you just kind of feel like lighter. Yes. Like even this week, I took like a mental health day on Tuesday. Like usually Tuesday's like an office day for me, and I didn't go in. I just kind of phoned it in and just took the day back to myself because I needed it, and I got a lot of stuff done. Like I cleaned up and just went
and you need those. I feel that.
Yeah, like went through a whole bunch of things on my laptop, just those little admin things that just all of a sudden when you do them, you just feel like 10 pounds lighter. And I just haven't done that in a while. So doing that was really nice. And then otherwise, like, we went to the head spa today. So that was obviously really nice.
Yeah, I love
so that kind of brought me up as well. So yeah.
Shout out to, what was it called again?
Lou Dream.
Lou Dream
Spa. Head Spa. Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to them. It was really amazing. They were so super nice, and it was just a really good experience. So if you haven't ever tried it before, like I would definitely recommend it.
And it was very affordable, throwing that out there. Like it was under $100, which I think everyone could probably like relate. Like for a spa service is really good. So that was nice too. That
it was and it was a really cool experience. Yeah. So
that whole hour affordable. So yeah, shout out to them. Shout out to them because they actually made our day today and like just, you know, made it. That was just good. Made it better. Yeah.
We are super amped today because we have a special guest, and she is actually on our mental health directory. If you guys do not know, Brown Gyal Diary does a lot of cool things around identity and culture, and we're going to jump into like Indo-Caribbean culture documentation today a little bit, but we're also going to dive into how that impacts your mental health and your Indo-Caribbean identity. And we have somebody from our directory. Her name is Emaan Singh. She is a registered social worker and therapist in the GTA, so the Greater Toronto area. And yeah, I'm excited to talk to her because I feel like we're really going to get a deep dive on what it feels like to have an Indo-Caribbean identity or Caribbean identity, and like the different mental health barriers that we're really facing.
I feel like I had so many questions just before we kind of got rolling to the podcast. Like, we were just all talking and stuff, and like I had so many questions come into my head where there's just I don't know, I think sometimes there's just things that you don't think about off the top, and there's so many layers to mental health and the people who are working in that field, and I think sometimes we just kind of think more so about ourselves in the picture. But it's it was just interesting to also kind of ask somebody else, like, what is it like for you on the receiving end of that, like, you know what I mean, being a therapist, and like what is it like on the other end of that. So yeah, and we're excited to talk to her about those things.
And I think like one of the cool things that really I think started our interest, and to start, we are actually not mental health professionals at all.
We work in marketing.
Yeah, we actually work in marketing.
Yes.
And I work a lot in like the community, so we're getting like that first, and you work a lot in the community as well.
Community and a little bit of corporate book publishing.
Yeah, and I think we get like these different perspectives and experiences of people, and I think like one thing that I really want to stress is the importance of having professionals like that on our podcast, because they actually can give us a real, like a professional outlook of what our mental health looks like and what it feels like and the real ways to navigate that. Because I think one of the biggest things is we as Indo-Caribbeans and as Caribbean people, we know what we face, but we actually don't know how to deal with it. And I think I think a lot of that, even to jump into like what you've been doing in the last couple of weeks with your interviews with CBC, your interviews with Brandon Gonez that's coming out very soon. Yeah. Like you talked a lot about the impacts of documentation through Carnival, but I think that comes from a lot of like documentation in general of Indo-Caribbean identity. I think that impacts our mental health experiences now a lot.
Yeah, no, I would agree, because I think like a huge thing for me, honestly, growing up was just the lack. Like, there was no Indo-Caribbean representation or documentation. Not to say it didn't exist, because, of course, like, there's people who have always been active in doing those things. But they weren't necessarily accessible to me, I guess, in that case. Or weren't things that maybe, like, my family or parents and stuff knew about to kind of, like, bring to me and present to me, because they didn't know about them themselves, right? So that lack of whether it was, like, seeing, shows or like movies or something like that. And also like big shout out to the Doubles movie, because I just went and saw that like 2 weeks ago.
I know.
It was so
shout out to Mark, one of the directors.
Shout out to Ian, the director, because he did a really good job on that. If you haven't seen it, I'm not sure when they're screening it again, but definitely if it comes back, you guys got to see it. But that movie made such a big impact on me. I was literally like in the back there watching it, bawling my eyes out. Like, it was ridiculous how much I cried. It was actually borderline embarrassing.
The first one was really good too. It was really
so good.
Yeah.
Listen, afterwards we went to, so they had like a bit of a Q&A with the director Ian and like a couple other cast members, and then after the movie I went down to just like introduce myself and say hi and tell them I loved it. And it was so embarrassing because I had like makeup stains all on like my eyes here from crying, and no one told me, because like I don't know, but no one told me. So I was really there talking to the director for like 10 minutes with makeup stains on my eyes.
But that's good. They're probably happy. They're probably like, she really, or she doesn't know how to do her makeup.
Either he thought I did that, either someone thought I did that on purpose, or they were just like, we're just not going to talk about it. Anyways, my point is not about the makeup, but it's just the movie impacted me so much, like seeing an Indo-Caribbean story, Indo-Caribbean and Caribbean, because it wasn't just like all Indo-Caribbean characters, it was Caribbean characters as a whole. But seeing all that representation on screen, seeing a story I could relate to, listening to like language that I could relate to, scenarios, everything was just like such a strong impact. And I'm like, I'm 28 right now. That was the first time in my entire life, in like coming up on 30 years, that I've ever seen a whole film that was Indo-Caribbean. Like, have you ever feature-length film.
Have you ever watched? Yes, it's fully Indo-Caribbean. You're right. Exactly. Yeah, because I was gonna say another movie where maybe it was okay, but Bazodi. I saw.
Okay, no, I lied. I did watch that. I watched that with my family.
That one was kind of cool too. But I get what you're saying. Like, they're like, we can literally pinpoint. Because there are so few.
But that one, I think the difference was because like Doubles is really largely taking place here. Yeah. Yes. So a lot of some of the topics that they talked about was like, the biggest one that stood out to me was sort of that like Canadian dream, where it was like, the father came here thinking he could sort of like make this really good life for his family, and all the things that a lot of our parents and grandparents came here for, right? You were told that there was a lot of opportunity, it's better for your kids, blah, blah, blah. But nobody also kind of talks about how hard it is to adjust to a new country. And sometimes it doesn't, like, in the case of the movie, right? Like, the son was told that his dad was here in, like, Toronto living this big life. He was a big chef. And then he hopped on a plane, came to see his dad. Like, he just pulled up on him and realized that he was like a dishwasher in a restaurant, and he lived in a basement apartment, and he was not living this lavish life with like a fancy car and a big chef at a restaurant like he was hearing back home in Trinidad. It's very different, you know?
Yeah, that's actually like really sad because it's a lot of realities, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And I think like when we think about that whole idea of like documentation and that Indo-Caribbean experience, I think a lot of it comes back from like a lot of what we see, even through like before I jump into the like our Carnival Canvas program that we did this summer and like how that impacted the girls, but also just like what we experienced like developing Brown Gyal Diary. Like when Brown Gyal Diary first started, it was like just an information source around like Indo-Caribbean identity, but there was a few other pieces that kind of supported us, like Lotus. There was a couple other like Indo-Caribbean figures in like the Toronto community for sure. There was some organizations in New York, but that was kind of like all that I knew, right? And when I think about like, I didn't even realize how not knowing or understanding my Indo-Caribbean identity impacted my mental health until I understood it. You know what I'm saying? Like I didn't realize, and I think that's kind of what got us into the mental health piece of like understanding like, shoot, this was like this missing piece. I didn't realize how not knowing or having that confidence through my Indo-Caribbean identity was the source of like maybe some of the issues that I experienced growing up, of like who I was, my confidence levels, like what I could accomplish. Like a lot of that came from that lack of.
Yeah, I think the same thing. Like sometimes I look back and I think if I just had like the things that I have now or have had now in my adulthood, if I had those 10 years earlier and just had them like in my, I don't know, middle school, teen years, I feel like it would have gone a really long way. Like you were saying, like we just ran the Carnival Canvas program this past summer. We just wrapped up this week actually, and the girls in the program are all like 12 to 16 in that age range, and it's such an impressionable age range. You're going through a lot of emotions, feelings, changes. We all know how it goes, but I just think if I had something similar at, you know, that age, it would have, I think it just would have made a big difference in my life and just also understanding myself. Because when you're at that age, like it's the same thing. You're trying to figure yourself out, right? You're out of being a child. You're getting older, but you're not an adult yet. But you're really learning yourself. But that was a big piece that was missing to me, and there wasn't really a lot of places to go for that. Or again, like I didn't know of them and things like that, right? But yeah, it like I think that's why the program even too was like, I felt like I was in the program with them. Like everything we did, I was like, I'm taking part in this.
Well, even like a lot of the parents, like when they so basically too. The Carnival Canvas was a program that we ran funded by Outreach and Toronto Arts Council. And basically what the program focused on was highlighting Caribbean cultural arts, carnival arts. So we learned different things. Like the girls learned different things like pen. They learned we had paint workshops. We had dance workshops.
We did a carnival Barbie workshop.
Carnival Barbie making, bra making workshop. A bunch of different things where they were able to just like experience carnival from a different lens. But also, I think one of the biggest things for us was allowing them to see that their cultural identity is like a big part of who they are and like understanding themselves. And I think like there was this one workshop where we actually reformatted the program a bit so we can spend some time talking about Indo-Caribbean culture, because a lot of the girls we had a conversation with them where they were like, how did they explain their identity? So they were like, they're West Indian. A lot of them just said they were West Indian, right? And I think like when you hear the term West Indian, like they think that it falls into that same, I guess it kind of does, but it falls into that idea of like Indian in a sense. Right? So we don't use the term Indo-Caribbean a lot. So they're not using it actively.
Well, Indo-Caribbean is still a very new term, relatively. And
I think like that is also like super important. Like why don't you, like, you know, you are the historian. So why don't you like give people a little understanding of like, why is it so new?
I mean, truthfully, I don't think I have the full context to like why it's so new. Well, okay, this is the thing.
Like just like the indentureship.
I can speak from I can only speak from my perspective. For me, growing up, whenever I heard any like terms that refer to like us, you know, whatever, it was either Caribbean, West Indian, or Coolie. Those are the three that I heard. 100%. Indo-Caribbean wasn't the term that I knew.
It's even still, you're right, it's still new. Like, it's still weird now.
It was new. And honestly, like, that's what I'm saying. Nobody in my family knew those terms. Or I honestly don't know when exactly it came about. But I think the first time I saw Indo-Caribbean was maybe towards the end of high school. I'll say like I saw it on a forum or something, and I said, "Cool."
That is kind of cool, actually, because I've never seen it. Yeah.
I did see it on a forum. I just can't remember what the context was of the forum, but it was definitely the end of high school. Like maybe it was actually like grade 12, like literally the end of high school. But that's when I had first saw it, because before then, if I saw any like terms, it would say like Caribbean and then specifically like, you know, Afro-Caribbean or African descent, whatever, around that wording.
Yeah.
But it was never, it never included like us as like Indo-Caribbean. So that was the first time I saw it. I think I don't know exactly where the term started popping up, but I just imagine it was through just similar things, like people in the community who are doing work. And like, I mean, coolie is, we all know, like obviously a derogatory term. That's its origins. So there's only so long we could go around using that. And technically West Indian wasn't even correct either.
And do you know, like when you go to places like Trinidad, they don't use that word.
They don't use those
They don't
words.
use it because it is derogatory, right? And I think like for us, like one thing that I noticed like with the girls is that we don't realize, and that we're kind of falling short on, and we're trying to get better at, obviously, is like bringing the education here. But like that, again, lack of understanding of like how do they identify, but how do they do it confidently? And I think that was like one of the things that for me, even when first Brown Gyal Diary, well, you've been here since the beginning, but you know, like Brown Gyal Diary, when it started, even through the programs, before like the digital space, it was like very weird. Like when I would walk around, like I would be like ashamed to say Indo-Caribbean. Like it felt weird, it felt uncomfortable, and that like did take a hit on even like the impact I thought that the organ, like Brown Gyal Diary, could even have. Yeah, because it was just like what is that? Like, what is that? And we don't really know, right? It wasn't until like we started having conversations and we started to really deep dive on like what things like the indentureship are, and even like in through the program, again through Carnival Canvas, like a lot of the girls don't really know what things are like emancipation are, or but they don't did learn. They did learn, they did learn the indentureship, and they seem like they started to kind of like put together like what does that experience look like? Like, why are we Indo-Caribbean? Like, what was that double displacement? Like, what did that even mean? But I think like it would be really helpful for you to kind of like share a little bit about the indentureship for people that are like new, because a lot of people may not even know what that is. I'll help you, but you could start.
Well, okay. It's just, I mean, it's a really layered conversation there. So, I mean, forgive me if I don't cover every single aspect of it, but its very origins, indentureship, after slavery was abolished, and that was in the kind of like mid 1800s, more or less. So obviously there was all these plantations, right, that were owned by British and other like European colonizers who were across the Caribbean. They wouldn't have wanted to give up these things that they had built over the last couple hundred years, and obviously we're making them a lot of money. But because of, you know, that system of slavery being abolished and you couldn't necessarily replicate and do that exact thing, they were looking for labor elsewhere. Right. So, you know, who else could they source people from? What other countries could they go and source people from? Who would fill the gaps? Because now those African people were freed and were no longer, you know, there to serve, to do that service for them anymore. So they came to honestly a few places like China. There, I think people forget as well, like there were
and we showed the girls like a really great
and they
like 7-minute video of this this Trinidadian teacher that like taught people. So we're gonna share it in the links below.
We'll put it in the links,
but it was like a really, really quick, informative way of just like knowing your history very quickly. But it was very kid friendly, so that was something I liked. And some people need that. Okay, some of us adults need that kid friendly education
even
around
for adults.
history.
History is a tough thing, and sometimes you need it to be palatable in order for it to like stick in your head. Sometimes just reading straight facts, honestly, like everyone learns different, so it's not the easiest to retain. But yeah, so they came and they sourced people from obviously like China, for example, was one of them. But the bulk was obviously in India. The circumstances around that were very mixed because people were promised a lot of things and sold this big dream, almost like what we were talking about before. And like I think a big Canadian dream.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the pieces were that people couldn't read. Right, so
people couldn't read, so they
couldn't speak the language.
What contracts? Yeah, they were being presented contracts and just basically being told like stamp your thumb here because they couldn't read it. And a lot of them, you know, realistically, our ancestors were poor. They were facing poverty, famine. There was a lot of things that were going on in India. They were kind of, I think, in like that post-British colonial rule era as well. So it had left India in a lot of a lot of trouble, more
disparity,
or less.
a lot of disparity,
a lot of trouble. There was a lot of pieces that were left broken, and obviously no one, knew how to clean it up, and they were just kind of.
And there was a big caste system, and
system played a role as well. So when people were offered sort of this opportunity and told, like, hey, you can come to so and so place, and you'll get riches and you'll get land and blah blah blah. I mean, for somebody, if you think about it, for somebody who's facing, again, poverty, famine, things like that, you barely have anything to your name, that would sound very enticing. And there was a lot of tactics that they used as well, right?
Yeah.
So whether it was tricking people, there were cases people were kidnapped as well, that I think we forget as well. Like,
and a lot of vulnerability, because a lot of them were women as well. A lot of them were like facing a lot of like probably abuse in their homes.
Well, women, there was a huge gap with women, because when it came, so after a few years, they started enforcing a quota. There was a quota that was enforced where for every 100 men who were on a ship, there had to be 25 women before that ship could go. Because before then, you would be getting a ship that, say, had, like, I don't know, for example, 150 men and maybe 15 women. So as they were coming over to the Caribbean, there was a huge sort of conflict and disparity there, because how were men supposed to get partners and continue a lineage and stuff like that, because it was so little women. So it was causing a lot of violence against women, a lot of fights and things like that. So that's why they enforced that quota and said there had to be a certain amount of women, because they needed them. They needed to have more women on board, because it was just far too unequal. So that became a thing, that quota for women.
So fast forward now, people are now placed into Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica. Those are like some of the most highly populated places. And these people are like, now this is our lineage, right? Like, this is where our stories begin. Well, I guess they started before that, of course. But this is where the Caribbean experience now begins.
This is where the Caribbean story kind of begins.
Yeah, and okay, so talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean,
I'm shy when it comes to history. Okay, I know it, guys.
It's my favorite.
It's our favorite thing.
It's my favorite thing to talk about. So
I can talk about
again, forgive me. I know I'm like not getting every single detail here, but we'd be here for far longer than we want to in that case. But yeah, people were in the Caribbean, and then they were kind of given, like, when they arrived here, they were given like kind of like a very base bone package. Like, here's, an outfit to wear, and here's, like some rice and some cooking pots, and here's your lodgings, and knock yourself out, essentially.
And I think one of the biggest things, like when we think about the indentureship, and I think when we think about where all of this, and the reason I wanted to bring up the indentureship is because where does that trauma come from, right? Yeah. And I think when people came to Trinidad and people came to Guyana,
there's so many layers.
Yeah, there's so many layers, right? And a lot of people,
the trauma traces back even before the Caribbean story started, because people were already in traumatic situations before they came to the Caribbean, right? They were facing abuse, famine, poverty, disease, a whole bunch of stuff. Like, they left under traumatizing circumstances.
A lot of people didn't even make it.
And that too, people died on ships as well. Then you got to the Caribbean, and then there was another shock, because obviously you're in a different place. And then, like, no one really knew what they were in for, right? So they got here, and then it was all of this work. The pay was ridiculous. And
that's the one thing I wanted to bring up too. Yeah. Like, the misconception of indentureship, right? Of like indentureship and slavery.
Yeah, because they are two very different things. Because slavery was a bondage that nobody consented to. People were, like, very clearly slavery. Yeah. You were taken, cuffed and brought and put on a ship and sent to work. You were not getting paid. You were not getting anything. You were put in this position for the purpose of servitude, and that was it. Indenture was a little different because there was regulation against that. You couldn't just straight up go and do that anymore. They had to have these, like, work contracts, for example. And then there was obviously there are issues within that. They also had to pay people, but they loopholed around it, because yes, they paid them, but the wages that they paid them were ridiculous. It was like getting paid a couple cents a week, which, again, in like maybe 18 something,
and I think, like,
got you your rice and
I think and I think a lot of it too was like, with that trauma of the indentureship and with being in a new country, like when we think about ourselves being in a new country, having no money, having no family, having no culture, having all these things, like you resort to things like alcohol, you resort to things like drugs, you resort to things like abuse, like certain people resort to things like abuse. Like a lot of women were harmed and killed in these spaces. So really what happens is, I think that's where that intergenerational trauma conversation happens. And sometimes we're not having, a lot of people are not understanding. Like I think we use, that word is used very loosely now without having, we're like, yeah, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma, but we don't have attachment to like where it really comes from. And we're not understanding like the pressures of like what we're now facing around mental health in our communities, right? So like when we think about like our parents and our grandparents and their struggle to come home, and they're not asking their kids or their grandkids like what's wrong, or nowadays when their kids are facing mental health barriers, they don't know how to support. So because they were mostly like work all the time, keep going, keep pushing. If you're working, you're doing a good job. If you're making money, you're doing a good job. And nobody even had time to think about their mental health because they were always in survival. Yeah, no, it's true. And, you know, it makes me think even till now, like one conversation that I have a lot with my mom. So my mom's mom, my grandma, she's retired. She's been retired for coming up on 5 years now, okay? And even though it's been 5 years of her being retired, she still complains that she wants to work. And she's always like, if it was up to me, I would still be working, blah, blah, blah. And then we're always like, Grandma, why do you feel this way? Like, you're retired. You worked very hard all your life, right? And like, for, you know, my grandparents didn't stay together. So my grandma did end up becoming like a single mom. She had 3 daughters. She raised them. She worked 2 and 3 jobs. And which is something that is barely ever talked about, especially from her generation. Like, nobody ever, like, for her during that time, it was probably such a traumatic thing to be a single mother at that time. Like everything was the breadwinner and the wife in the family, right? Like that was the winner. And before that, she was a stay-at-home mom. Exactly. Leading up to that. And then my grandparents split up, and then she was put in a position where she kind of had to, like, it was kind of like a flight, what is it, like fight or flight, fight or flight, because if you didn't, what were you gonna do? You had 3 kids to provide for. And then even now, sometimes, you know, like my mom will be like, you know, I wish she would just like enjoy retirement. Like I wish she would like get more involved in like little activities, and like, 'cause she lives in a senior building, right? So like get more involved in activities or like hobbies and stuff. And like, you know, my mom will get frustrated with her sometimes because my grandma will be like, I don't want to do them things, and I don't want to do them things. Literally, she'd be like, I don't have time for them things. And it's like, why? You're retired. But then, you know, I'll sometimes say to my mom and just kind of like reroute the perspective where I'm like, think about it. When did she ever have a chance to form a hobby? But think about us. We like struggle. We sit down for hours trying to figure out what my hobby's going to be. I know. And my hobby was what? Organizing my dad, planning events. Like, you know what I mean? So even like, again, it's like passed down. Full disclosure, right? I have tried to get Ashley into hobbies, okay? I'm getting into one. Hot yoga. Let's take one day at a time. Okay? Well, one day at a time. Yeah, for sure. I think like really when we think about it, like we don't even realize, like obviously we laugh it off, but it really is like a serious thing. Yeah, like I'm struggling out here. It's like, but well, and I think like for my grandma, right? She got married at like 19, had my mom at 20, and then has just been a mom and a grandma, like literally ever since, right? So it's like, and I told my mom this was like a very recent conversation we had too. Like I'm talking like last weekend, and I was like, think about it. When did she ever have a chance to have a hobby? She's been a, you know, married and a mom since like, for how long? That is her life. That's all she knows. And then when she became like a single parent, when did she have time? Her hobbies were talking on the phone and watching Young and Restless. If you know, you know. Oh my God, is your grandma my grandma? They're all the same. Do we have the same grandma? Like what? They all share the same. They all share the same archetype. No, mine is very holy. So she'll be like, me, you'll never catch me cuss and say nothing like that. I'm a holy woman. I'm a woman of. She's my grandma is a woman of God, but maybe she's a check on. My mom always calls her Mother Mary. She's very holy. She's a very holy woman. She knows her Bible. When people back home send her like those little Bible quotes on WhatsApp, she'd be like, I don't know why they send me Bible quotes. I know my Bible. It's like, they're just trying to say good morning. They're just trying to say good morning. There's so much drama in the senior Indo-Caribbean community. Like, there's just so much. I can't keep track. Honestly. I can't keep track. It's so entertaining. But yeah, like I think that this is a great segue into like bringing Emaan, because I think she brings a lot of great insight and perspective on her experience, one as an Indo-Caribbean individual, but also her experience of what does Indo-Caribbean mental health look like, and what has she faced, and what has she been experiencing with navigating the Caribbean community. So we are going to take a quick 5-second break because our amazing editor is going to edit this real quick and she's going to be back when you guys return. Perfect. I am so ready to introduce our guest this week. Her name is Emaan Singh. She is actually on our mental health directory that you can find on our website with over 70 mental health professionals on there that are all Indo-Caribbean or Caribbean based all across North America. But Emaan is actually a registered social worker and a therapist, and she actually runs her own private practice called Blossoming Minds Therapy. So Emaan, why don't you just give them a little background of who you are, what you do, and just a little bit more about your career.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here. A little bit about what I do. So as you mentioned, I'm a mental health therapist. I've been in the field for quite a while now, working with children, working with families, adolescents, teenagers, young adults, helping them navigate their experiences of, mental health challenges, trauma, separation, and a whole bunch of things. It's a lot of...
It is. Mental health is a big thing. And it honestly is hard to pinpoint or put a pin in pretty much everything that you do. But I think that's one of the reasons that we wanted to obviously have a professional directly from our directory on here. Because I think one of the biggest things that we, even what we were talking about before, is what does the mental health experience look like for our community? And where does it stem from? So I know we did get to chat a little bit before we got on camera, and we got to talk a little bit about your experience as an Indo-Caribbean growing up in your community and how mental health has impacted you. So why don't we let's start there. Let's just go right from the beginning. What does your experience as an Indo-Caribbean woman look like, and what did it look like growing up?
Yeah, so I do want to mention I am a Muslim Indo-Caribbean woman, so it does look a little bit different, I think.
No, definitely.
So JK to grade 8, I was in Islamic school. And my family, I have some who are really religious, some who are not religious, right? So when it came to navigating culture versus religion, I found that it was really hard growing up, even trying to find my identity in myself, right? Even today. Yeah. And in regards to that, growing up in Islamic school especially, I don't think that mental health was ever talked about. And on top of that, the added layer of also being Guyanese as well. Mental health isn't talked about in our culture.
Of course,
right?
Yeah, definitely.
So there were two things, being in an Islamic school and also growing up as a Guyanese girl, right? So mental health was something that was not talked about. Yeah, and I think that's a really big thing. And I think we have been able to see it a lot, that the Muslim Indo-Caribbean experience is not talked about a lot. It is not highlighted. And a lot of people don't get to really understand what added layers exist within the Muslim Indo-Caribbean experience. We do get to hear a little bit from, actually a big chunk from Muslim Indo-Caribbean Collective. Shout out Karima, who runs that. But why don't you tell us a little bit of what that actually looked like? What were some of your experiences going to an Islamic school? What did that even look like or feel like? Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I grew up in an Islamic school, JK to grade 8. It was a predominantly South Asian school. And I really only remember having one Indo-Caribbean girl in my class.
Yeah.
So I used to remember when, for example, an assignment was, draw your flag and, we'll put it up on the walls, right? So I remember I was the only person in my class that had a Guyanese flag. And everyone would question, what is that? Where are you from?
Yeah.
Right? So that in itself, it did feel a little bit, I did feel left out growing up in an Islamic school, right? So I really didn't have many people to relate to growing up.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point too, because I think for the Indo-Caribbean experience in general is something that we all kind of say, it's a commonality between a lot of us where it's that wasn't something I saw, or that wasn't something that I experienced, or I felt left out, and things like that. Even for me, I don't share the experience of being Muslim Indo-Caribbean, but even just being Indo-Caribbean, and same thing, those recognizable flags on the wall when you had school projects and stuff like that, or the friends who would be where, what is that country, or what is that flag, because they've never heard of it, for example. That was a big thing.
Exactly. And I found that a lot, when I was in growing up in Islamic school.
like when I would say I'm Guyanese, they'd be so shocked, like, oh my God, like there's actually a Guyanese Muslim person, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I find that is a very interesting one because there is a lot of Muslim Indo-Caribbeans. Like,
but the thing is,
my family's Muslim. Oh my God, I forgot.
You do have that.
Abdul. My last name's really
exactly. Abdul. But there's so little knowledge, I think, in general. Like in the general public, there is tends to be so little knowledge around Indo-Caribbean, like the existence of like Indo-Caribbean people, like people of Indian descent in the Caribbean. Like not a lot of people actually know that. Even in like South Asian communities, not a lot of people even know about that side of history and things like that too. So I think that plays a role where people end up being like shocked or like surprised, for example, because they've never heard of it.
And I think like when you think about like when we say like that multi-layered that intersectionality, like the disparities within that intersection it's very difficult because us as just your average Indo-Caribbean outside of like an Islamic school, right? We already face those disparities within the South Asian community, right? Like who are we, where are we placed and where do we fit and what does that look like? It's something that we see so much of, right? Yeah. And we as Indo-Caribbeans have in many ways faced a lot of like prejudice within that community, right? Like, why do you listen to Bollywood? Why is this a part of your culture? Why do you practice this? Like, why does your Hindu religion look different? And we start looking at your religion, your race, your culture, all these different things, like you said. And I think like when you now put yourself, a young girl, placing yourself in now a Muslim school or an Islamic school. And I just want to mention that like I don't have a lot of knowledge on the Islamic experience. So like I speak very loosely. So correct me if we like say anything wrong or whatever, right? But when you put somebody in that position, like I feel like that creates its own layers of difficulty as you navigate that as a young person, you know, and like naturally impacting your mental health.
It does, right? And I also think, and it's something I'm actually going through right now. So in Islam, so we have Islam, then you have the Guyanese or Indo-Caribbean culture, right? And a lot of the culture, I think a lot of the things that we do in the Caribbean culture, the Guyanese culture specifically, I think some of it is kind of not permitted in Islam, right? Like, I don't want to beat around the bush. Let's talk about the dancing. Let's talk about, you know, the partying.
Of course.
You know, let's talk about even drinking is a big part of our culture too, right? And a lot of that, is prohibited in Islam. So trying to navigate that, it's really hard for me, right? Like, how am I able to embrace my culture and also be able to follow the religion? It's a tough thing for me. So
what has that looked like? Like, what does that journey look like for you so far? Like, what kind of things have you maybe had to do or adjust or stop doing, or even just like boundaries you've had to create for yourself in spaces as well?
Oh my. So I think as of recent, I've been more around like, you know, the Caribbean culture, and I love it. It's amazing. It's so much fun. But I think just setting boundaries in regards to just, you know, maybe not doing certain things because of my religion, you know, for example, like maybe not drinking as much, right? Like limiting myself on that.
Yeah, for sure.
So those are some things that I find that I'm doing in regards to boundary setting. But I still do find it tough to navigate that, right?
And I think like a lot of like Indo-Caribbean specifically, like we were chatting about this before, but what does that look like? Like what does that labeling of Indo-Caribbean mean? And I feel like that's where a big part of that mental health piece comes in when it comes like identifying yourself or understanding yourself. And it all, again, goes back to that piece of the Indo-Caribbean experience in its entirety, right? Where you're kind of like, okay, well, I am an Indo-Caribbean person, but I don't like doubles. I don't like chutney. I like go to Islamic school. Like, you know what I mean? I go to Islamic school, like as in your case, as an example, I go to Islamic school. Well, like I don't like, you know what I mean? Like I don't do this. I don't do that. So that means I'm not Indo-Caribbean, right? Like that's what the perspective is. But in reality, like I think one of the biggest things is like Indo-Caribbean culture has so many different ideas to it. And it's not attached to one religion. It's not attached to one type of food. It's not attached to one type of music. It's actually like the Quran is a big part of it, is a part of now the Indo-Caribbean culture because there's so many Indo-Caribbeans practicing the Muslim religion, right? But we like tend to shy away from that. We hear that a lot when it comes to like Hindus and Muslims and Christians because it's like, oh, well, if you're Indo-Caribbean, then you must be Hindu. right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Which is like, that's not
As I
actually
mentioned,
true. Yeah.
you know, when I tell people, yeah, I'm Muslim, people are very shocked.
Yeah. No, I
Because
think
they wouldn't expect a Guyanese person to be Muslim.
Okay, so to that, like, I wonder how that affected your mental health personally, because I can say, like, I know from my own experience of, like, having that, you know, identity crisis and, like, not feeling validated, it definitely affected the way I viewed myself and the way I just kind of viewed, like, my culture and things like that. It felt, like, very... I don't know, it almost felt like I didn't exist for a long time. So I'm curious to how that felt for you in your own situation.
To be honest with you, I think that impacted me by giving me a negative perception of my culture.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why, though.
Yeah.
Because in Islam, a lot of things are not permitted that we do in the Guyanese culture. And as you know, I grew up in pretty religious. My family's really religious, my mom's side, and I went to Islamic school. So just kind of hearing that, right, hearing everything about Islam and things you shouldn't do, it gave me a negative perception about my Guyanese culture. So I did steer away from it for a very long time.
And what do you think, like, and like getting back into it now, like, what would you say are some of, like, I know we touched on it a little bit, but like, what would you say are like some of the way that you are seeing it in a more positive light?
Yeah. So I think now I'm able to understand a little bit more about what the culture entails, and that you don't have to do everything that the culture entails. And it's because you don't do these things doesn't mean you're less of a Guyanese or Indo-Caribbean person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just having that thought process.
I feel like a lot of what we hear is that the Muslim Indo-Caribbean experience is not represented at all, right? Like a lot of people don't see it. A lot of people feel like they are the minority within a minority within a minority. Like,
which
so
is crazy considering we're already such a minority. So the fact that it just gets broken down.
Yeah. So like now we're like people of color. Then we're like Indo-Caribbean people. Now we have like Muslim Indo-Caribbean people. So like they are like in from what I've heard is like it is very far down, right? And like that experience of practicing Muslims and all these like different stereotypes that are attached now Indo-Caribbeanism and being Muslim. Like what are some of the things that you've had to navigate through something like that? Like this like multi-layered intersectional identity.
So, I mean, I can only give experiences for myself growing up, right? Yeah. Like, I'll give you great examples. So, as I mentioned to you, I have the religious side of the family, then I have the not so religious side. So, something as simple as, you know, how in the Guyanese weddings, when you party at the end, so you see half the family leaving and half the family staying and having a good time, right? But then at the same time, like, let's say we stayed at the party, then I'd feel a bit, I think, judged by the family who left. You know what I mean? Yeah. So for me, to be honest with you, judgment is a big thing that I think I face even today when it comes to my family, and also being able to fully embrace my culture. So a part of me does feel a bit, I don't want to say ashamed. Yeah. But maybe a little bit, I feel a bit judged when it comes to my family and when it comes to our culture.
Definitely. Are there ever like comments or things that like family has made to you? I mean, if you're comfortable sharing, but like any sort of things that people have ever said that have pointed out in these situations to you?
Well, not to me specifically, but I do hear it from my family members. Like, you know, I have some family members who are really religious, and I have some family members who play mass, right? And they will make a lot of comments towards those people who play mass, right? And a lot of negative comments.
Yeah.
And I think like one thing that we do want to acknowledge too is not that having the Muslim Indo-Caribbean experience is all judgment. I would say like there are a lot of beautiful elements that I know like you even talked about of like why you are still like, I would assume that you are still like committed to your religion.
I am very
and you still are like a very confident practicing Muslim Indo-Caribbean. Like what are some of the positive things that you feel that people don't get to see as a Muslim Indo-Caribbean woman? Because I do feel like for sure, like a lot of people, it's natural. Like when you hear Muslim, there's so many stereotypes attached to it.
100%.
And like I would I wouldn't want someone to walk out of this podcast thinking that is, definitely. You know what I mean? When you've like also shared so many beautiful things about your religion as well. Yeah.
And you know, the religion is beautiful. It's a great religion. I just think that sometimes the people who give off that negative perception of the religion when it's actually such a beautiful, peaceful religion. And yes, I am Muslim. I practice. But some of the positives, you know, I think that being an Indo-Caribbean Muslim woman and having my family all come together still and we're able to enjoy each other, I think that's what's very important. Definitely. Right? Having the cultural food, you know, listening to music to an extent, right? And still trying to have a good time, you know, hearing them tell stories about back home in Guyana. Like these things are really intriguing to me.
Yeah, and I think like sometimes when you hear like Muslim Indo-Caribbean, you might think like, oh, they don't have the full Guyanese experience or they don't have the full Trinidadian experience. But I think like a lot of what it is and a lot of what like gets left out of the picture is that, no, that is just another element, right? Yeah. Like the Hindu Indo-Caribbean experience is different from the Muslim Indo-Caribbean experience, is different from the Christian Indo-Caribbean experience, is different from the atheist Indo-Caribbean experience, right? Whatever you practice or whatever you believe in, like a lot of people, like there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of prejudgment. But a lot of times, like a lot of these things just like almost like to what you said about religion and culture, like they always get mixed up. Yes. And I think like even in the Indo-Caribbean community, that does get mixed up a lot. And now we're learning like how to navigate it because people like you are actually speaking out and being like, this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. And this is what these disparities have looked like for us, you know? But no, I think that it's super important.
I think that it's also a point to just say like, there's not really one way to be something, right? And I think sometimes like we get lost in a lot of those like stereotypes or like archetypes of like what an Indo-Caribbean person is, right? Like what, and it also includes things like that, like religion and what you celebrate or what you do at certain times of the year or what you look like. You know, all of those things kind of fall into those kind of categories. Yeah. The way we humans tend to do that. We break things down in a certain way, right? This group of people looks this way, they do these things, this group, blah, blah, blah. And it's not correct, but people tend to just naturally do that, right? But it's just one of those things where I think it's a bigger conversation that as a community, we need to kind of talk about as well, to just say like being Indo-Caribbean doesn't look one way. And especially considering we're already part of a diaspora. And now there's a whole bunch of us now who have now been born in whatever it is, Canada, America, the UK and stuff like that. And then you're part of something else all over again.
Which is like the double
so it's a double diaspora. Yeah. So our experiences are just naturally going to always like
be overly different. Have you ever been to Guyana?
Never.
Really?
No, yeah. And since my mom left Guyana when she was, I think, 7, she hasn't been back either.
Seriously?
Seriously, yeah.
Wow.
That's big. Yeah. I feel like that's a big thing. The reason I say this because like I am like an active Trinidad lover. Like I go to Trinidad a lot and I find like that is a big, like for me, it was always been, I don't think it defines you to be less or more than, but I do think it is like super impactful on like your perspective on your cultural identity. But
see, I feel very connected to that because I'm Trini and Guyanese and I've never been back to either one. And honestly,
you too?
I've never been back to either one. There's a level
we need to plan why, but we need to plan a trip.
Yeah, we really should.
Yeah, we need to plan a trip because 100%. I would what I wanted to ask. Well, I guess I could still ask like what has that like. What is your, if you can share, like, what has your mom shared about that experience of, like, never being back to Guyana? I'm assuming, like, your mom, like, she's obviously not, like, 25. She's probably been here for at least, like, 20 years.
She's been here for a while now. Yeah. So, full transparency, she doesn't really care to go back. Yeah. She tells me, she's like, it doesn't matter if I go back or not. She enjoys Canada. So, never really had a need to.
That is a beautiful thing though, right? Like it is a beautiful thing. Like my grandpa was like always like that too. He's like, I love, he was like the proudest Canadian. Like he never missed voting. But my point with that is like, he would never miss a vote. I love that for him. No, he would like literally never miss voting. Like he would actively like practice his right to vote because he's like, that is like such a big part of like being a Canadian citizen is using that. But my point is with that note is like what now, like, I think it is interesting how we are still so attached to a lot of different things of our cultural identity, even without having to go back. You know what I mean? Yeah, and with being able to still like keep that culture alive.
I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that even kind of like segues into our understanding of like you as a therapist and like how have you navigated or what have you seen with the Indo-Caribbean and Caribbean community around mental health? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so from from my experience working with Indo-Caribbean clients, you know, there's a lot of stigma attached to mental health, right? Growing up in these Caribbean countries, it's not talked about enough. And there's this perception of, you know, if you go to therapy, it's either you're weak and it's either, you know, you're not able to handle things on your own.
You're mad.
You're not. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're going mad.
Or
madhouse.
You're not man enough, right? That's what I hear quite often with my male clients, right? They steer away from going to therapy because they feel like they're less of a man. And that's what they've been taught probably by their fathers, and their fathers have been taught that by their fathers, right? It's intergenerational.
Yeah, it really is.
Right?
It really is. And it's honestly like very sad because one of the things that I see now is like we are like really experiencing those rippling effects because I feel like a lot of people can't hide from it anymore. A lot of people can't like shy away from it anymore. Like it's really coming to the forefront of the conversation. Like there is now again, like back to the directory, there's 70 Indo-Caribbean mental health professionals that are now like actively like probably just like you, like searching for ways to like actively talk about like the Islamic experience. Even if you're not just helping an Indo-Caribbean individual, like how many young, like going to a religious school can have a lot of positive effects.
Yes.
But it also, with the perspective of religion, and again, like talking about religion we know is obviously like a very serious thing. And I say this with like not a lot of full education around religion or being in a religious school either. It's just like there are also a lot of negative impacts that it can have. You know, like even as yourself, like you went to the school and then you hear all these things about the Muslim experience across the world. Like, you know what I mean?
And that's the thing, right? Like I want to be very clear with, once again, as you said, like there's culture, but then there's religion as well, right? So growing up in Islamic school, some of my experiences, I was told that if you listen to music, you'd get hot metal poured down your ears.
Good Lord.
Right? I was taught that if you partied or something, like there was many things that were told that were used as scare tactics.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also a reason, now that I'm thinking about it, as to why I was not so fond of my culture growing up, because of these scare tactics that I was taught at such a young age.
Yeah, because like now you're facing like, okay, well, I'm Muslim, but now they're telling me don't listen to music, but my uncle's a DJ, you know?
Exactly.
So like, what am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to do?
You can't help it. Or like you see your cousins on the weekend and they're playing something.
Or like, oh, I don't want to go out with them now because they're bad. Or, you know, like you're
100%.
naturally at family parties like, oh, I'm just ready to go home now because like they're the bad kids. I don't want to be associated with them. You know what I mean? So
but once again, like I want to be very, very mindful and like, you know, clear to say like that's not the religion, right?
Of course.
Once again, it's just the people who are teaching the religion, and they're not the best teachers, I don't think, if you're going to teach somebody a religion and use scare tactics, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So I think honestly, maybe that's still something that I'm having to figure out today. Right? So
hey, listen, we all got a little bit of trauma we're carrying.
Exactly. So there's this one, like, I don't know, hearing like as we were talking about generational trauma and stuff just now, there was this one like video I saw on Instagram that made me think of, and it was just basically like this is how generational trauma works, and it was just like a bunch of glasses, and like one had like
I've
darker,
seen this,
have you seen it? It has like a darker liquid in it,
yes,
right?
I saw
and
that.
It's like your grandmother, and it pours all the way into your mother, and then it pours all the way into you, and then it's like, but when you work to you know, reverse and fix and do the work and stuff, and then the water,
gets
like
clear.
they pour in water and it goes clear and stuff like that. But I just feel like that's the place that a lot of like our generation is in now, where we're like that cup where we're trying to like clear the murkiness that has been bestowed honestly on us from like countless generations at this point. And then I think it's so tough because we have access to, at this point in our lives, more than anybody else before us has. Like we have so much access,
100%.
even to the directory, for example. Like even to know that there's 70 Indo-Caribbean mental health, you know, professionals, and there's probably way more. We just haven't like connected with them yet, for example. But it's just it's one of those things where it's like we have this access. And when there's these stigmas or these sort of like blockages, even within us now, where you know, we have those, and it's just like it's almost like it's in the way. It's in the way of kind of us, I think, elevating as well as like a community, because we have these tools, but it's so instilled in us almost not to use them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think like even when you think about mental health and like back to kind of that piece around like how have you been navigating like the mental health Caribbean experience like within your field and within your work, it's like it's it's probably really difficult and really hard because it's like you see the problems, you can see some of the solutions, and they're probably a lot easier than we realize. You know what I mean? It's a lot easier than, it's definitely not easy, but it's easier than the way that we think it is. You know what I mean? We think it's very hard and it's very difficult, but all we really need is, like you said, the tools and the resources. And a lot of times what happens is, like, as Caribbean people, like you said, we sweep everything under the rug. We don't talk about anything, right? Like everything is being swept under the rug. Everything is piling onto the next person, you know? Like when you look at it, how many of our young people in the Indo-Caribbean community do drink as like a tool to have fun, but are also doing it every single day, right? And are also now like damaging their livers. And this is like going on for like generations and generations, right? It's where, to the point where it's like, or like whatever, smoking, or like, you know, like, I don't know, beating their children, whatever the case may be, right? I don't know what it is. But like now we kind of, I don't know, like I just feel like with Caribbean mental health, like it's just a gap right now. And it's almost like, how do we fill that gap, or how do we clear the misconceptions that people have around mental health in our community to get people more actively using mental health, because we need it. Like our community needs it.
We very much need it. And I think all of our like mental health professionals, just like yourself, right? Like you're all very ready and willing to help and put in the work to be part of that change, but it also takes like two to tango, because you can't all of a sudden like show up at someone's door and be like, I'm gonna be your therapist. Like people need to also seek it out.
And I also think that having conversations like this is what helps also draw people towards therapy too, normalizing it, right? And normalizing the Indo-Caribbean experiences. Right? It's showing them, hey, like these are the problems that happen, and you know what? It's okay to seek support. It's okay to reach out. Right? It doesn't make you less of a man. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you less of a person.
Yeah, it's true. Right? It's true. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I 100% agree.
So I'm curious for you, like, especially, again, being a social worker, being a therapist, and regularly hearing a lot of heavy, you know, topics and things like that with your clients. How do you cope with that and take care of yourself and also practice that mental health and that wellness in the reverse, like to take care of yourself afterwards?
So I can say one thing that's very, very important when you're a therapist is to have some sort of supervision, right? So I currently, in my job right now, I do have a supervisor. She's also Indo-Caribbean, actually.
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool.
And she is amazing. So she really does understand, you know, when I bring like a client up, she'll understand on a deeper level, you know? So I think that's very important. Self-care is very important. You know, I do go to therapy. I have a therapist. Exercising. So going on nature walks, doing hot yoga, you know, going to the gym. Even just, you know, treating myself to like an unhealthy meal or something, you know, my favorite meal, spending time with my family, spending time with loved ones. And another thing that I think is really, really important to help me cope with my job is just, this is what works for me, right? Just thinking about how I'm helping people, you know?
Yeah, that's major.
Yeah.
And I think like one thing that I really wanted to mention or ask is when you think about like cultural therapy, right? Because I feel like a big part of the focus of Brown Gyal Diary is that cultural element to the therapy, right? Even growing up for myself, like I've gone to a lot of psychiatrists, I've gone to a lot of therapists, like in and out, right? And I've gone through so many because a lot of them, the only ones that worked were always people of color.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Every time I had to speak to like a non-person of color, it was so difficult for me. I shut down. I couldn't. Like I felt like if I didn't feel good. I didn't truly. Like the reality was I felt like this person didn't understand me. They didn't understand my family. They didn't understand what I was going through. They didn't understand any of it. So I was like, it was such a struggle for me. Right. And one of the biggest things was, how do we make things culturally responsive? So okay, well, of course, we're trying to do the work, so we know what it is.
Yeah.
But like, if you could explain it from a perspective for the average person to understand, why is cultural therapy and an understanding of culture from your therapist such an important piece of it?
So as I mentioned, I do have a therapist, and she is a person of color. And from my experience, even me being a person of color and, you know, providing therapy to somebody else who is a person of color, I think it's so important because, you know, there's certain things that we understand, you know what I mean? Even down to, this may be small, right? But it's not,
It's not,
like
yeah.
how does your family function?
Oh, that's major.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right?
That's major.
Like,
Yeah.
how's the communication, right?
Yeah.
What do you guys do? What's your traditions? Do you guys pray together? All of these things are so important, right?
Yeah.
So having an understanding about these things is important to even understand your client, right? So you have to ask these questions, right? And even relating to them with certain things. That's very important. So
Yeah. And I think like that made a big difference even for myself, like going to therapy as I was young. Like we had like a school social worker and they were always people of color.
Yeah.
I feel like my school tried to be very mindful of that, and in the community, like I grew up in Scarborough. So like almost everybody was predominantly a person of color. Like I could count the non-people of color in my school.
Yeah.
Like literally count them. And I think for me, like I noticed a natural, like you feel that like, you feel that like motherly feeling, and you feel that softness, because I feel like when you have a therapist that understands like your culture and understands your religion or understands your experience, right? Like you can even meet a Muslim person, or maybe helping somebody Muslim that is, or maybe let me think of how I can word this. I could go to somebody that is a Muslim person and they still may not be able to understand my experience as much as a Muslim Indo-Caribbean or Muslim Caribbean person may be able to understand, right? But it would still be helpful if the person is also same religion, same similar background, even to some capacity. Yeah. Right? So for me, it was like, that was a major thing for me, where it was like, whoa, this is totally different. Even when my son goes to daycare, right? Like having like women of color that are caring for him, not that it makes a difference. Like there's a lot of great people that work in childcare, no matter what color you are, no matter what race you are. But for me, because I understand like the impacts of these like, again, like these disparities that we face as like people of color, non-people of color, like for me, it was so important to make sure that there was that cultural response, right? And I feel like even in the areas that you work in, or the spaces that you work in, you probably naturally offer that cultural response without even realizing it,
Exactly. And I think this, you have shared experiences, which is so important, because
it's major.
You better understand each other, right? And I think that helps so much in regards to the therapeutic process.
Yeah.
Right. And even something like growing up in a Guyanese household, there's a lot of yelling. Well, personally, like I experienced it, right? So having a client share those experiences, I know what you mean. I hear you, right? Yeah. And also sharing with them how I navigated through those experiences. It also helps them too. It gives them ideas, right?
How did you navigate those experiences?
Oh gosh, being yelled at.
How did you navigate? Because I want to know. Because I would like to know. Because I want to know if I dealt with it the same way.
So, as a kid, I shut down. Yeah, and I kind of took it, right? Because you're a child at that point. But today, it's completely different, right? I am able to communicate to those people who did yell at me in the past and explain to them, hey, like, this is not okay. Like, if you want to communicate with me, please communicate with me effectively.
And you know what's funny? I was just having this conversation with my grandma the other day with me. It was actually 3 generations. Me, my grandma, and my little cousin who's 12 years old. We were just talking about, like, how different it was, right? Like, even just, like, how my grandma could speak to me as like being like almost 20 years older than my other cousins versus like how she could speak to them or what she could tell them. She's like, because this generation is so different. What she could tell her kids and she could tell me as an older grandchild and the only grandchild, she can't, she's not that she can, like she has a wonderful relationship with them, but it's very different on how you navigate it and how you deal with those things because now like it cannot be avoided, right? Like mental health was a huge thing in my family. Like my grandma experienced it, my dad experienced it, I experienced it. And now I can even see like at a young age, my son is experiencing it. So now you look at like, how are we really navigating these things, right? Like how is it changing generation through generation? Because it's really like, it's 360. You know?
I think that's why therapy is important, right? Because, when we speak about these experiences with our therapist, we're able to acknowledge what happened, right? And the behaviors that we don't want to be repeated to our children.
100%.
Once we're able to understand those behaviors, right? We're not going to repeat them to our children. So I think that's why therapy is really important for everybody.
Yeah, it is. And I was saying like therapy, and I don't know, like we may have said this already. I can't remember. We've been having such great conversations, but therapy is like when you find a great therapist, it's like hitting the jackpot. It really does change your life. And I don't think people understand. Like, people think, oh, like, I don't need to talk to somebody about my problems. That's what you probably always, I don't need to go and talk to someone about my problems. I don't need to do that. I can deal with my problems myself.
Yeah.
When in reality, like, when you hit a really good therapist that really cares, and naturally, like, we do aim to help our own communities. We do, especially with all the barriers that people of color face. Like, we naturally want to help our people. We want to get them to the next level. We want to help them deal with these things, right? So for me, I realized, like, having a good therapist could change your life. It did change my life. It changed my life full force, you know? Like, I suffered from, like, dealing with, like, being very suicidal many, many times. And without a therapist, I don't know if I'd be here today, you know, truthfully. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that going to a mental health professional should be as the same as one in access as well, but it's not as accessible. It should be being able to go see your mental health professional just like how you go and get a physical every single year.
I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, and I think it's a big thing. Yeah,
I mean, that's something that I always hear kind of come up too, which is just like when it comes to, you know, therapy and therapists and stuff like that. Sometimes I know that people want to access, but then there's that some like there's a barrier. Of course, it's not necessarily the cheapest thing, or if you don't have coverage through like your job and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's
so
major.
Sometimes it's very
there's a lot of red tape
for people. Yeah,
for sure,
it is, and
it's
I think
on purpose. Yeah, for sure.
For therapists, they're doing such like tough work. It's big work, so obviously they absolutely deserve to get paid accordingly for what they're doing, because it's not exactly easy on them. Yeah. But it's such a weird balance, because it's like they deserve to get paid fairly, obviously, but then it's tough in return too for like people who want to access, and if they don't have the means to access and stuff like that, then it's, I don't know, there's like that's like that thing there where it's like what do we do there? How do we navigate
and
that?
I think it's really tough as well, because you know, the wait lists, like I work in a community organization, right? And our wait lists like is a year to get mental health support. So it's really tough, right? You're right. Like there is a lot of red tape. And the cost of therapy, if you're in private practice, like it is pretty expensive to someone who can't, you know, who doesn't have the means.
Yeah, I think like a lot of times it starts at like 100 and like, can you talk a little bit about the sliding scale? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like, okay, when we look at the realities and we obviously want people to leave this conversation with, I can get therapy. Yep. We can access it. There are ways, you know? Yeah. You just have to need to know the ways to like navigate it, the resources to access. Exactly. But I'm curious to know, or curious for you to share, what are some of the resources, including the sliding scale?
So, you know, if you go online, there are various platforms that you can reach out to therapists on, such as Therapy Tribe, There's Psychology Today, and there's much more, right? And
Brown Gyal Diary.
Of course. So, you know, when you read the person's bio, you can see that they do offer a sliding scale, right? But I think it's so important to connect with that therapist and ask them about their sliding scale rate, right? Like personally with me, I definitely have a sliding scale rate to make sure, you know, I wouldn't ever want to turn a client down because they couldn't afford therapy, but that's just me, right? Yeah. So I will work with my clients, you know, to, you know, give them therapy that's affordable for them.
Yeah. And so a sliding scale is basically, let's say I come to my therapist, I'm struggling really bad. I don't have a job, but I need therapy. You know, I'm on my last job, like I need therapy really bad. Yeah. Basically what would happen is I would tell you, I heard you have a sliding scale. Yes. How do you navigate? How do you, as the client, what I say to you to be like, this is what I can afford?
Yeah. So, you know, it would just be an open conversation, right?
It's just a lot of trust.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just having an open conversation with that therapist. The therapist will ask you questions about, you know, like what your situation is, what you can afford. And then you guys just go from there. Every therapist is different. I can't speak for, you know, all of them. But it just depends on the kind of therapist.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good start. Yeah. And I think it does give people the opportunity to be like, okay, if I do find somebody that I really like, I can try. Exactly. You know, and they can see if they can work with it. Yes. Yeah. But I think like if you were to leave our community, the Indo-Caribbean community, with something today around mental health and your experience as a professional and also your experience as an Indo-Caribbean, what is one thing that you would want to share to let them know that it's going to be okay?
Yeah, you know, I do want to let, you know, the community know that, you know, you're not alone in this, and we all have to work together to help each other. And, to better our community, to enhance our overall well-being. And it's okay to reach out for support, you know, and yeah, you have the directory for Brown Gyal Diary. So yeah, and I'm sure there's a bunch of beautiful, great therapists. So please reach out if you need any support.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. Like, I feel like a lot of... Let's do a final check-in. Let's do our final wellness check. Okay, that's your thing. So you lead the wellness check. It's your thing. You do the best.
I really enjoy doing it. But we've been on quite a journey throughout this whole episode, honestly.
Yeah, we have.
So with the wellness check, right, what we do is kind of check in on, like, how are you feeling? Scale of 1 to 10. And then just, like, one thing you're feeling really good about this week, today, like, just something that's really stood out to you. Because one thing we've been talking about a lot, too, is just kind of, like, celebrating wins instead of just passing them by. So yeah, start us off. How are you feeling?
Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, scale of 1 to 10.
And one good thing.
Okay, yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling 8.5.
Okay. Nice.
Because I have the opportunity to be on your podcast.
Aww.
And yeah, just have great, open, transparent conversations with you. So I'm feeling really great about that.
That's good. And I think like it's so important to note that like these are so important, especially like coming from the professionals that are also just like the regular people in our community as well. Like you can offer both lenses, and I think like that is like one of my most favorite things. So I really like, we obviously both really appreciate you being here today.
I feel like I've learned a lot. Honestly.
I have, yeah.
And like, I feel like I left with a lot to think about too. I mean, I'll personally say I haven't tried therapy before. It's always one of those things where I'm like, I should probably try it. Like Ashley and I have talked about it a lot, and she's always encouraging me, same thing, like just like, yo, like just do it. So I don't know. I do feel pushed more now to, not pushed in a bad way, just like pushed like, yeah, I should probably give it a try, you know?
Yeah, and I feel good. I feel like I obviously feel like a 10 because we're doing this. So I always feel like, okay, I've like accomplished something like pretty good. Like it's not like, you know, we all live like very busy lives. So to even get into the studio to like get these done is not an easy thing. Like, you know, it takes a lot of like energy, planning. Well, not as much planning because we have somebody that shoots it for us now. So it does take the stress off a lot.
We have to plan the day.
But we have to plan the day, yes. We do have to plan the day. So it does kind of take the stress off. I won't lie. Like before when we had to edit things ourselves, no, that was not fun. But it does make it more fun now that we can actually enjoy it. So I do feel good that we're here. But like one thing I also do feel good about is that like we were able to share how important it is to just like normalize therapy. Like just normalize it. Like we're not crazy if we go, we're not psycho. And just like, even if you're having a good day, go to your therapist and tell them you're having a good day. You know, go to your therapist on a good day. Or if you don't have a
therapist, tell somebody you're having a good day.
Yeah, or like find something.
Well. Like and tell somebody.
Like even what you said, like even if therapy is still something you can't afford or something you're not ready for, like take on a hobby, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm really
my favorite topic.
Yeah, literally.
That's my favorite topic.
Like my favorite thing is literally about the like my scale is 10 because I feel like we were able to share that, and I really hope like everybody can walk away with that if they don't walk away with anything else.
Nice.
What about you?
Okay, well, I mean, I started. What did I say? I think that I started the episode at like an 8, and now I think I'm up to like a 9.5.
Okay, you're almost there. You're almost at 10.
I'm really almost there, and honestly, it's okay. It's just because like
9.5 is good.
Yeah,
very close.
Right?
Very close.
I'm very close, and I think same thing. Like I just feel like we've had a lot of good conversations today. We've talked a lot about things that have been really interesting, very eye-opening, like a lot of new perspectives, and it's just. Like I'm always on the side of like always learning more, and like, you know, there's never really a ceiling where you're like, okay, well, I know it all now. There's always 100% something new to learn, even within like the Indo-Caribbean experience, and talking about your experience as like a Muslim Indo-Caribbean woman. That's something where totally learning new things there, and just in general, like I said before, it left me with a lot to think about. And I'm just going to point out my one thing about the hobby thing, because Ashley knows my favorite topic. But if you don't have a hobby, like I so encourage you guys to pick up a hobby and just like dive back. And my one tip to that is always like think about what you were into as a child, because chances are I find that those things always come full circle as an adult.
That's so true.
And the things that you really liked as a kid, and then you know, when we're teenagers, we're like, oh, it's not cool anymore. We like drop it. And then as an adult, I'm telling you, just like revisit that. Hobbies are probably, again, as somebody who hasn't got to like therapy yet, if it wasn't for my hobbies, I don't know, I might.
Maybe I should try DJing, because when I was young, I went to DJ school. I swear to God.
Ashley's lore is just unmatched.
I swear to God.
Unmatched.
I swear to God. I swear to God.
I know.
Scratch
I
Lab.
absolutely believe you.
Shout out the Scratch Lab.
There's so many other like layers to your story.
I know. I've done it all.
Do you want to get into it?
No.
Okay.
I've also worked at Chipotle, okay, guys? I'm like a very
What?
skilled burrito rapper, okay? But yeah, no, nonetheless, why don't you let people know how they can access you, your resources, your supports, or just like connect with you?
Yeah, of course. So my social media, my Instagram is Blossoming Minds Therapy, and I'm also on the directory for Brown Gyal Diary, Emaan Singh, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Beautiful. That's a lot of things. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
That's a lot. But
Lots of ways.
last but not least, my favorite part of this podcast, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. We got a good amount of subscribers the first podcast, so we want you guys to keep pushing, because Jay Shetty always says this, that's what's going to keep it going, and that's what's going to keep the podcast alive, and that's what's going to keep the guests getting bigger and bigger. So thank you guys so much.
And don't forget, drop your suggestions for our podcast name.
Podcast name
In the comments. If you made it to the end, please comment your suggestions. Let us know.
Prizes to be won.
There are prizes to be won, and we genuinely really appreciate all of your feedback, your support. So having your hand in naming this actually goes a really long way for us. So don't forget to do that.
See you later, everybody.
Bye.